Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 6 of Not Another Podcast. Sounds even crazy to say that we're on episode 6, so thank you for joining us thus far. And yeah, this is not another podcast where we go beyond the headlines and make sense of everything to see just what it means. And today we're talking about the hottest topic in the news right now, which is the Israel and Iran conflict. And in recent months, we've witnessed one of the most dangerous escalations in the Middle East in years. And what started with proxy skirmishes in places like Syria and Lebanon suddenly turned into missile and drone strikes crossing borders, with both nations striking each other's territory for the first time in decades. But now, what we've seen as a tentative ceasefire has been announced today and broken under immense international pressure. The guns have gone silent, for now at least. Tensions still remain high. The region is sitting on a powder keg, and the slightest spark could set it off again. Behind the ceasefire is a deeper story, though. A long, bitter history between two powerful nations fueled by ideology, military ambition, and the growing shadow of a nuclear threat. And while the fighting may have paused, the conflict is far from over. Tonight, we're going to unpack the root causes of this conflict, what the ceasefire really means, and how it can affect all of us, even here at home in South Africa. So we'll talk about the Strait of Hormuz, the rise of global oil prices, and whether this war could glimpse into something much, much larger. Could this really be the start of World War III? And let's talk about it, gents. Welcome to my two bros, Ndima and Sunshine. So I'm going to start off with giving the audience the historical context, right? So pre 1979 is when we saw, before the Islamic Revolution, Israel and Iran relatively had normal diplomatic trade relations. Iran even recognized Israel as recognized Israel de facto and sold oil to it. And then we saw in the 1979 revolution, the Ayatollah overthrows the Shah and turns Iran into an Islamic republic. And from then on, Israel is labeled as a Zionist enemy and becomes a symbol of Western imperialism. Iran begins backing anti-Israeli groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, and later Hamas in Gaza and Houthis in Yemen, while Israel counters with military strikes, cyber attacks, and targeted assassinations of Iranian scientists. Now, the big question here, the big issue, is the nuclear tensions, where Israel sees Iran's nuclear ambitions as an existential threat. Although Iran insists the program is peaceful, Israel has reportedly lobbied against nuclear deals and taken covert action to stall Iran's capabilities. So where are we today? Iran launched drones and missiles into Israel after an Israeli strike killed Iranian generals in Syria, and Israel responded with a deep counterstrike inside Iranian territory, marking a shift from proxy to direct warfare. The ceasefire, declared as of this week, was broken under heavy pressure from the US, Russia, and the UN. However, it's extremely fragile and both sides remain on high alert. So who are the superpowers involved? The United States, as we know, is a longtime ally of Israel. The US provides billions in military aid and shares intelligence. Russia is an ally of Iran in the Syrian war, and they walk a fine line, being publicly neutral but strategically aligned with Iran. Russia, what do they benefit? They benefit from the Middle East instability by drawing US focus away from Ukraine. And then China has economic ties to both nations, and China is concerned about oil price volatility and has offered to mediate peace. It's also increasing influence in the Middle East through the Belt and Road Initiative. And so this is what's going on right now, guys. I'd like to ask you, like, what really comes to your mind first when you hear all of this? Dima, I'll start with you. And what's your first impression? What's your initial impression of what's going on in Iran and Israel?
It's extremely, extremely tense to say the least. Well, first of all, I'll preface by saying if you want to DM your crush, now's the time because I think things are really, really, really escalating.
Oh
And
my goodness.
no, but hear me out. But like the thing is,
This
this
guy.
now, but like I mean, this entire conflict has been bubbling in the form of, well, between specifically Iran and Israel. It's been bubbling for decades in the form of a proxy war, right? So there's been a lot of tension since the Islamic Revolution of Iran. where Iran essentially went from being a friend of the US to becoming essentially a mortal enemy. Because and Hawks, you mentioned this earlier that Iran went from being ruled by the Shah, which was a pro-Western leader who was basically a US puppet, some would say, but ever since he was usurped and then the Islamic Revolution took over and now you have the Ayatollah, the relationship between those three countries in general has become very tense. So it's very complicated, but at the same time, we're clearly in for a very, very rough time because almost when the world powers go to war or when they threaten war, every other little state that has, so to speak, pledged allegiance gets dragged along with it. So I think now it's just a point of monitoring how much more tense the situation gets, which countries are allied to who, and us as South Africans, since we have to speak to the relevance of our experience, where do we land in this entire scenario? That's where I am the most concerned. Where exactly do we land? To who do we owe our allegiance? Do we owe our allegiance to anyone? Should we remain impartial in this entire conflict? What do we do? Because at the end of the day, when countries go to war, we know that it's the everyday people who suffer the most. It's the people on the ground who go through a very tough times. Yeah, it's very tense. I'm just sitting on the sidelines, doing the reading that I can, trying to stay plugged into the situation as much as I can. But honestly, I just hope this can be squashed in a way that ensures as little collateral damage as possible, if that's even possible right now. But yeah, we'll see what's going to happen in the future. What do you gents think?
Yeah, it's crazy, bro. But before we get into my opinion, I'd like to hear what Raz thinks, because you said a lot there. And yeah, I just also hope things don't get to a point of no control where we see a full-out war. But let's hear what Raz has to say.
Yeah. A very sad one. Um, it's never good when there's war. In this particular case, obviously, we're going to look at what's happening in the immediate effect. We know these countries have been at war and having battles for it's also one of those ancient wars once again. However, right now, the war is particularly about what's happening in terms of the uranium in Iran and the supposedly bomb or missiles and all that's being built. Firstly, we need to look at where I'd like to start at is number one, in terms of I think it's the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Yeah.
Israel is not supposed or is not one of the countries that has authority to have nuclear weapons. The US is, right? And Iran's also not one of them. Right. So the fact that number one, Iran has, or rather, let's look particularly at Israel, has heavy atomic bombs on their side, is against the IAEA. All right. And we need to also look at they actually strike first, right? So they hit Iran first. And because of they saying there's something they're building, they're not happy with that, obviously. But now they also shouldn't be having nuclear weapons to begin with. So now who's wrong, who's right? Because you shouldn't be having nuclear weapons and you striking people because you saying they're building weapons which could be destructive to the world. Now, with a situation like this, it's very tense because now who steps down? Are these people willing to speak? Particularly now, it seems like they're not, because even after the ceasefire, Iran is quite strong in the fact that they're not going to surrender. And I hear people are saying, no, the US is going to back Israel and so forth. And yes, the US has said that they are backing Israel and they have been backing Israel. However, we can't take away the fact that Iran is a heavy country in terms of military, and they have a heavy population. I mean, war with Iran is not like it's going to be a walk over the park. It is going to give the U.S. and Israel problems, and they know that too. So right now, I think, like Mthatha was saying, we need to look at how is this actually going to affect even us as South Africans? Because the reality is, if we all know the domino effect. The domino effect, well, most people are taught this at school. Domino effect, when the big countries, when the US is sneezing or the US is going through something, most other countries and small countries suffer. And in this case, we are a smaller country, and a war like this, if it continues, will eventually have some effect, some way, somehow in South Africa. And then where do we stand in this? We all know South Africa's part of BRICS. South Africa also has relations with the US. We remember what Trump was with Ramaphosa not so long ago. So where does South Africa go? Where do we stand? It is tricky because when it's war, I remember I was having this discussion with the Hawks a few nights back. When it's war, unfortunately, we have to pick a side. We can't stand on the fence when it's war. So now it's going to be very difficult. Where are we going to stand as South Africans if this continues? Obviously, the hope is that the war doesn't continue because that is we've went through too many wars as a planet Earth generally, not as a particular country, as Earth. And I'm sure people are trying to run away from that. So as South Africa, we've been through wars and we're also trying to heal from that. So I think, yeah, it's a heavy one, James. I don't know, Manox. I don't know.
Yeah, you raised a lot of concerns, Raz, and I think what I really want to touch on before we get to how it affects us as a country. What I will say, like, I'll just give you a few things that will happen should this war go on in terms of a South African context. As you've seen in the Ukraine war, where Russia is known as one of the biggest exporters of oil in the country, we experienced a huge increase in the oil price, which increased the petrol and diesel price, which increased inflation because now you saw a situation where electricity costs went up, transport costs went up, which had an effect on food and other goods. So that's the first thing that's going to come up when it comes to this type of situation because of the commodity that's being at play, which is oil. So I'd like to touch on Israel not having Israel having nuclear weapons, but attacking for their nuclear weapons, because this is the basis of this entire conflict, is that Israel is accusing Iran of building nuclear weaponry and weapons of mass destruction, which is why they attacked Iran in the first place, because they believe that Iran's building and development of nuclear weapons is an existential threat to Israel. And I don't necessarily feel, this is just what's going on, is that Israel are being hypocrites because they have been known to possess nuclear weapons in the form of missiles and whatnot since the 70s and 80s. But they are pointing a finger at Iran's nuclear developments as if they are clean. They are clean when they are totally not. And you get to a situation where they started attacking Iran, and now where things really got bad was when the US got involved. And as we've seen over the weekend, where Donald Trump and his army deployed those B-2 planes, which carried bunker buster bombs, which inflicted damage on what you call this Fort O and the other two nuclear stations that I can't really remember. But what's important about Fort O is that this is Iran's most valued nuclear station, nuclear facility, because it's located high up in the mountain, and it's based about hundreds and hundreds of feet deep within that mountain. So it's very difficult to reach and to also penetrate if you want to cause any harm to it. So we see the US dropping these bombs on this nuclear site and inflicting damage, and then it opened a can of worms. Now Iran is majorly upset. They retaliated. We saw Israel retaliate as well. And then this has catastrophic consequences because you see now Iran is upset. Although there has been a ceasefire that has been implemented, this is where the damage is really done. And now you see that things are really, really heated. So what do you guys think of this whole situation with the US? And yeah, just what's your take on it? And I'll start with you, Sunshine. Like, with the US getting involved and doing the damage that they're doing, like, what do you think are some of the consequences, and what's your whole take on the thing?
Okay, so with the US involvement, we need to look at the situation of this is now you getting back up, all right? Because now Israel is not fighting this war alone.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you call backup and you have great missionaries, I'll probably do the same. So Iran's probably going to start calling people that can assist them too. And we are aware that Russia and China did mention points that they're not happy about the actions of the US, particularly, that they would have preferred the US also stay out of this. And I'm surprised because the US said they would stay out of this initially. I don't know what happened, and they decided to involve themselves in this. So look, Walks, if we're going to war and you bring backup and you bring more people to assist you win that war, it's happened. Even South Africa used to do this when they were going through war. If they needed assistance, they'd go upon other countries. There were countries assisting us during all our wars. So I think now this is just making this worse. Just made it so much worse. America shouldn't have been involved because now that America's involved, it's bringing the whole BRICS thing back again. Because now this strengthens the unity of the BRICS formation because they feel like, you see, this is what we say. And it's just gonna. I feel like if this continues, this really will get messy. That's just how I feel about it.
What about you, Ndima?
Yeah, very interesting. So I just think we need to like be very realistic about what's really driving all of this, ne? This is about protecting international interest and power. So, and one of you gents brought up the entire issue of nuclear weapons and why countries like the US are trying to interfere with countries like Iran, trying to develop their own nuclear program. And the US's justification for that is, well, we're trying to protect, we're trying to sort of nip it in the bud when it comes to, basically they don't want any allies of terrorist groups to have access to nuclear weapons, but then raises the question of, okay, then why do you get to have nuclear weapons? Why does the United States get to have them? Why does Israel get to have them? Why does every other country get to have them? But there's suddenly an issue when it comes to countries such as Iran. Now, you could make the case of, well, true, we don't want countries or governments that support terrorist groups to have access to nuclear weapons. But then things fall into a lot more perspective once you start thinking about the numbers of nuclear weapons per country. So before we go any further, let's set the tone on who has how many nukes, right? So let's start with the US. The United States currently has 5,444 nuclear bombs. 1,744 of them are ready, apparently, for deployment. Now, second comes Russia. Russia has more nuclear weapons than the US. They have 5,580 nukes, right? Now we go to China. China has 500 nukes. France has 290. The UK has, but the point is, there are countries here who are sort of wiggling their fingers at countries like Iran and saying, no, we don't want you to have to develop your nuclear program because you are allied with Hezbollah and Hamas, etc. And it's like, okay, cool, you might have a point there, but then can we just remember that you have thousands of nuclear warheads in your own shores? Now, we already know most, but for anyone who doesn't know the capability of destruction of a nuclear bomb, we're talking about literally the ability to destroy the planet multiple times over. Right. And but now what I want to get back to is a point that you raised, Raz, when you said, what is the point of countries having nuclear bombs? So the whole point is that when nuclear bombs were invented or when they came into the playing field of war, it changed things completely. When they dropped nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they changed the game completely. So now war went from pitting thousands, if not millions of men together and strategizing and using tanks and missile warfare. Now it changed to a matter of, this is world-ending stuff. I don't even have to send men anymore. I can just send a B-2 bomber to your country. No one will know. I will send a B-2 bomber to your country, drop a few nukes, go home, nobody die. Nobody on my side dies, but thousands on your side will die. And it's not necessarily about winning the war. It's about a statement. It's about saying, please step out of line again, and I'll show you. But then the question is now, when multiple countries who are enemies have nuclear bombs, who loses and who wins here, really? So I think the point of nuclear bombs is not to use them. It's kind of like a stalemate where it's like, we have bombs, you have bombs, I dare you to launch yours, I now will launch mine. But the point is, we all lose if we actually have to get into this playing field of we're launching nuclear bombs at each other. So it's like a psychological thing of like, we know we have the ability to cause far more destruction than is, and so we rely on that fear, or they rely on that fear of, okay, Russia won't launch their nukes, the US won't launch their nukes, but if they launch theirs, we'll launch ours. And then when that happens, then it's a matter of everybody loses, because this isn't about just killing the enemy soldiers. When you're launching nuclear bombs, you're talking about eradicating entire cities, provinces, countries, you name it. So we're stepping into a very, very, very different, very dangerous like kind of war that we haven't seen ever. So yeah, it's very tense,
Dandira,
Jets.
Dandira,
Yeah.
I love the point you mentioned on the latter. So I actually want to ask a question, Nalendo Itetayo, right? And the question is, you see now, this is the problem now, because number one, how do we determine that a particular country should be allowed to have nuclear weapons? Number one. So this now is done with other organizations, and like we we're saying, the IAEA earlier on, right? Fine. And now when you look at that organization, it's mostly Western dominated. The people that stand chair and the people that make decisions in that are mostly Western people or Western nations. So now, how's that determination made? Because we know if we give someone the power to do it, what power that gives them. Because like you were saying, it's more about power and dominance and fear. It's nothing really like that. It's just to show you that, look, bro, if you try me, I'm gonna just wipe all of you out, right? And why does America have that power? Why does another country not have that power? You know, why? Who determines that? Because that's very concerning. That's why we are where we are right now. Because there's people who should be having, people feel like shouldn't be having, and there's ones that shouldn't be having that have, and it's just the thing of, okay, now who's right, who's wrong, who should have them, who shouldn't have them, who should have more, who should have less, because the one who has less feels like, no, I want more so I can protect myself more, and that makes sense. I'd also feel like right now, I feel like South Africa should also keep safe right now, actually, because it's like, okay, what happens to us then if shit hits, if for real, what happens to us if things, because it can happen. So
Yeah.
Yeah, just
how do
yeah,
we work around this, bro?
No, so just to
just
clarify a bit, so when it comes to the whole nuke situation, so it's a matter of no one should have them. Firstly, nobody should have this level of magnitude, like a weapon that can cause this much destruction. But just to answer your question of why should the US get to, the answer to that is they themselves consolidated so much power over hundreds of years that they're not willing to give up their top position. They wouldn't. If you or I were in that position and we had built an empire over 500 years that managed to become the world power and that pours almost $1 trillion into their military every year, you wouldn't give it up either. You would do anything to protect that position. And that's why I'm saying it's a power thing. It's about, we can't let allies of China, for example, because I think this is where it is. We can't let, and when I say we, I just mean from the perspective of the US, we can't let our enemies' allies continue to build nuclear weapons because that is a threat to our power. It's a threat to our status quo. So if Iran is allowed to continue building their nuclear program, they will be contributing to the effort of their enemy, which is China, their
For sure.
opponents. So the more countries that are in line with China and the East and Russia, the more of a threat there is to the US. So it's like the reason isn't something moral. It's simply because the US has managed to hold on to so much power for so long, they're never going to give it up. Why would they? Because that means their destruction was. It's not just about, oh, we're no longer the top G. It's just, it's US influence and US power and political influence goes down the drain if they sit by and do nothing as the East builds nuclear weapons for whatever reasons. But Oksalayo, the point will be we're the East. So let's say it's China or Russia, but China and Russia and all of our allied states are all developing nuclear weapons. Should we just sit by and let that happen? No, we won't. That's the psychology that the US is working from. So yeah, I think that's just the main reason behind all of this, behind all the complexity of it all. It's about power and consolidating it and keeping it. That's where this war is starting from, I think.
What's your take, Oaks?
yeah, I like the fact that this question raised a deeper motive between the stakeholders involved in this conflict, where you talk about now the initial motive was to destroy Iran's nuclear power and stop them from producing weapons. But ultimately now what we're gathering is the fact that there's a whole power dynamic issue that's going on here, where the one superpower in the West, which is the United States, doesn't want to let go of their influence and their dominance over the region. And then you find that Iran, on the other side, is aligned with China and Russia, which are the US's competition, counterpart, and adversary. Ultimately, you see the fact that Iran Iran was growing in terms of their influence, and also China and Russia catching up to the US's power in terms of them having influence over the world. China is competing with the US economically, where you find Russia is competing with the US militarily. And neither of those parties want to let go of their power. And so you get a situation where on the one side, with the US and Israel, they are coming from a point where they're acting high and mighty as if they are not dirty, because they have nuclear warfare and capabilities within them. But then they don't want to see an ally of their main rivals having the same amount of power, because now that is a threat to their empire. So I think the one thing I also wanted to ask about this is, where do you see this going, and how stable is what you call this? How stable is a ceasefire? Because another factor that contributes to this is the fact that there is the area called the Strait of Hormuz, where you find 20% of the oil in the world is moved and produced in this region. And both the US does have oil interests in this region, because this is where 20% of the global oil is exported. And how do you guys think this plays into this whole dynamic of this nuclear warfare and conflict?
You know what, Oaks? When it comes to the ceasefire matter, I think I mentioned earlier on that Iran made it clear that they not surrendering. They are going to continue. So I don't know, is it really a ceasefire? Because was it even discussed, or are they trying to discuss? Because if one nation is coming publicly and saying, and its leaders are saying, no, we're not going to surrender. So I can't say that ceasefire is legit right now, because the leaders confirmed something else. And unfortunately, at this rate, I'll have to listen to what the leaders are saying, because the leaders are driving most of the decision making in what's happening. If the leader of a nation is saying, no, we're not surrendering, we're continuing forward, then I think the ceasefire, I don't know if this is the solution to this particular war.
I don't
And
think so
I don't know
either.
if these gens will actually, ultimately, the best solution here is for these guys to sit down and talk and try sort this out, right? But is that going to happen? Right now, there's a lot of hatred. There's a lot of tension. Remember, people died. So some families are hurt. People are still under shelters. People are still fleeing. So it's still hot right now. It needs a lot of leadership, and a lot of people who are really coming with the energy to try and change what's happening, to really see that change happen. And sometimes, not in a bad way, but I think sometimes some decisions are unnecessary. If you look at the situation of, I think it was Obama. Obama made a peace treaty, and these guys were fine with this, and there was an agreement about nuclear weapons, and everything was fine. But Trump came and dismantled that. Trump removed that, and you must remember, before that came about, these countries were fighting or were having issues for some time, and it took so much to even get to that agreement. So I feel like also that dismantling of it was the beginning of what we're seeing right now.
Definitely. And with what you're saying about the peace treaty, is that this was the document that was keeping all parties in check as to the signatories, because it prevented them from going beyond a certain threshold when it came to producing uranium, which produced the nuclear power. Because with Iran, their restriction was about 3.7%, which, if I'm not mistaken, is enough uranium to produce energy and power for their economy and their people. Anything above that was used for medical purposes, up to 20%. Then anything beyond that, like over 20% plus, was seen to is seen to be is seen to be enough uranium to produce what you call this weaponry, right? Anything beyond 20% to about 90%, right, is considered nuclear powerful weaponry. And you saw that Iran was at a stage, as we speak, at the time of this recording, they were playing at about at the 60% level, So that was also a huge concern. And then with Trump dismantling this agreement, you found now that there was no regulation in terms of who could produce how much. And that has contributed to this concern and this conflict where we see Israel now attacking Iran for Iran's nuclear facilities. And there's something else I wanted to add with what you said regarding Iran not backing down, is that there was a tweet that went out like shortly after the US bombed Fordo, Natanz, and the other nuclear facility. The foreign minister of Iran, he sounded very angry. I'll just
Yes,
see
yes.
if I can't find this,
Okay,
because
please do.
it scared me. It scared me. It scared me. Okay, so here's the tweet by
Okay.
Sayed Abbas Arakchi. I hope I'm
Mhm.
pronouncing his surname right. Don't bomb me, guys, if I mispronounce it.
Yeah.
Sorry. So what man says is the United States, a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, has committed a grave violation of the UN Charter, international law, and the NPT, which is the agreement, by attacking Iran's peaceful nuclear installations. The events this morning are outrageous and will have everlasting consequences. Each and every member of the UN must be alarmed over this extremely dangerous, lawless, and criminal behavior. In accordance with the UN Charter and its provisions allowing a legitimate response in self-defense, Iran reserves all options to defend its sovereignty, interest, and people. So you have this tweet that comes out. And earlier today, you had the Ayatollah who also echoed the same sentiments, and he said things very strongly about Iran not surrendering because it is not in their DNA. He says that the Iranian people are people of culture, and their history runs deep in terms of the formation of the great civilization of the Arab nation, and to consider defeat is an insult to them because that's not something that's in their vocabulary. And I was having this discussion with Raz as to the ceasefire, and I personally think that this is far from over because you don't bomb a country's nuclear facility, right? And claim victory over that in such an arrogant manner, right? This is a project that Iran has been investing for decades. And then you come through and you try to destroy that, and you think these people are going to take it lightly and just submit and surrender. You must expect some retaliation, which we did see when Iran attacked the American military base in Qatar, where they launched missiles on that shortly after, and that the ceasefire happened. So with this being said, in terms of, you heard the tweet and you heard the Ayatollah talking about this, like, where do you guys see Iran pushing this? What do you think is their next move? I'll start with you, Sunshine, and then go to Ndima.
Look, I think with Iran right now, like you said, they're making it clear that they're not going to back down. I'd like to say something different, but unfortunately, that's what they say. So they making it clear with the tweet, with the news, everything, that look, we're not backing down. We've got our history, we've got our civilization, and we've got countries that back us up. And so I really don't see Iran backing down to this. I know if this continues, it will be a problem because America's probably also going to start investing more in this war. And obviously, war at any point is very bad. As countries, I think we're trying to run away from war. Or I'd like to assume we're trying to run away from war. But at this stage, obviously, that's what we're in. And yeah, let's see what happens. I don't know. Tandira, what's your take, bro? What's your take on Iran?
Like I said earlier, like when it comes to war, you made a good point by saying, we all obviously know that war is bad, but I think what people are kind of overlooking about this entire situation is that if it actually does reach like full on open war between the US, Israel, Iran, and whether or not Russia and China will be involved, I think, as I said earlier, the people who will suffer the most will be everyday people. Now, if we're talking about this war happening specifically between, let's say hypothetically, this continues as a war between the US and Iran, and by extension, Israel. So I don't know about you, gents, but I don't see any bombs touching US shores. But I can definitely see thousands, if not maybe even millions of Iranian people suffering because of this. Because we know that all the US has to do is send a B-2 bomber, send drones, and whatever justification that they may have, but you can be assured that dozens, if not hundreds of Iranian people will be dying every other day because we'll be hearing the US sent a drone to so-and-so in Iran, or the US sent a B-2 bomber early this morning and bombed Tehran, etc. So, and then at the same time, when I think about the allies of Iran, so China, Russia is still busy dealing with Ukraine. China has its own interests that it's China has even been reportedly been preparing to try and invade Taiwan. We don't know if that's even going to happen or not. China's also been trying to push the borders of Bhutan and I can't remember where exactly, but somewhere in India, northern India. So China is trying to do a lot of different things on its own. Russia's got its own thing going on. So the question is, if they do get involved, which they most likely will, to what extent will they get involved? And then when that happens, I don't see this war not affecting everyday people. And just we're going to be hearing about this in the news. We're going to be hearing about thousands of people dying, and most of them probably won't even be American. So my point is just like, if these world leaders could maybe, and I understand that this is a complex thing. Like, geopolitics are complex. We're just three bras having this conversation, but never mind the fact that geopolitics are complicated, but we know that there are egos involved here. And these world leaders act like they speak for their people, but do they really? Can we even trust that? Can we trust that Trump speaks on the behalf of the American people? Can we trust that the Ayatollah speaks on the behalf of the average Iranian? These people act as if they speak on the behalf of their people, but their people probably resent them, and their people don't even want this war. But they're the ones who are going to suffer the most in the end. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough, but it's not going to go well, is all I'm going to say. If this continues, way more people are going to die. Way more people, whether the whole world gets involved or not. Like, a lot of people are going to die.
Quick question,
Mhm.
Volks, to you, just on the floor. So I know, Tandira, just to touch on what you're saying, in most cases when it's war, people would look or shout towards the US, right? Because we all know the US's dominance. However, that's the funny thing about the times we're living in now. Times have changed in the sense of one of the key strategies or elements of a nuclear establishment or war is you keep things secretive in a way of people don't actually, the countries don't actually fully disclose where their camps are. Like the camps we're hearing about that are getting bombed and all of that, I can bet you, bro, that is not half of what is actually hidden.
Of course.
Right? There's so much more hidden from all these countries. Looking at now the media, I remember those times saying, no, just like a few died in, and a lot more died in Iran, like 500 and something. But when you look at tweets from people in Israel and you look at what's happening and on the other side that's being shown, you can see that, no, man, much more people are getting affected, much more people are dying, much more things are actually happening than what's being shown on the news, which goes back to who then controls also then again the media. And we highly aware that the media in most cases is controlled by the West. That's what I'm saying. This becomes tricky because what we actually seeing as the people, is this fully what is happening on the streets? I think we'd have to maybe go to Iran or go to Israel to actually see what's really happening. Because like you said, Andira, we're speaking from afar. We just gents talking about what's happening, and we're concerned about both sides. And we're just trying to raise the awareness to everyone, and obviously people give their takes on this, and obviously find possibly if we can play our role in trying to find a better way to move this forward. Yeah, it's tricky, Tandira. So that's what I want to ask. Like, gents, what's your take on? Is it really Iran is losing out in this war like that? Because Israelites are saying that, look, we are struggling actually on the low. It's not what's being said. And what's really happening, gents? Are the camps all being destroyed, or real time? Are they camps that are actually established that haven't been touched yet? Because how are these people so fully confident to continue this war if everything's getting destroyed like that? Surely there's something they feel like they've got at the back to continue. So yeah, what's your take, Walks? What's your take, Tandira, man, on this?
Yeah, Raz, you bring up very valid concerns, but just to put it out there as a disclaimer, I'm not going to Iran, guys. I'm not going to Israel. Raz, I don't know what you're on about, dog.
Hell no. Andy, yo, we might even get conscripted, gents, and we're China's allies. So if China joins and if they feel like it's necessary, we might see a draft in South Africa.
Nah, dog. No way. But just to answer Raz's question, can you just kindly repeat what you said, Raz, and then I'll just give my take quickly.
I was just asking, based on Tandira, it's a follow up on what Tandira was saying, right? On one of the first points he mentioned on the US. And I was just saying, what we're being shown of the US dominating and taking control of what's happening, obviously supporting Israel and so forth. Is it truly that way? Because when you look on the tweets, if you look from people in Israel, people are saying Israel, no, it's not like that. We actually, there's much more people dying. So is it true? And remember, the media is controlled by the West.
Yeah.
And remember, like I was talking about the camps and with the camps, these camps, most of these missiles and these bombs are kept very secretive, Hawks, very secretive. So it's not like what we're being shown is fully what's there. And like I was saying, if it's all being destroyed, how are they so confident to continue this war if things are the backup or everything's being finished?
Yeah, there's definitely manipulation from the media, bro. I'll tell you that. I'll tell you that right off the bat, right? Because with this damage inflicted by Trump and the US Army, I was watching a few videos this morning, and you are getting a situation now where Trump was tweeting that the US Army totally obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. You are getting other sources now that are coming out from the US. I'm not sure if it's the intelligence or whatever, that may not be the case, you know. And apparently Trump has been lashing out at these media outlets as if they are apparently fake news. And you also get a situation where Iran is also confirming what these other guys are saying, that yes, they inflicted damage, but not to the extent that is being said in the media, you know. And there's also a situation where you found that Iran was well aware that this might happen, and they had a contingency plan, because a few days prior to the US nuking their facilities, you found that Iran was making way in terms of getting out whatever they can from their facilities in terms of the weapons and other important resources. They were moving them to other places. So I don't necessarily, as much as you hear what Trump is saying, that the US totally obliterated, I don't think it's to the extent that what the US president is claiming, right? And also you find that with what you're asking in terms of, is everything what it seems, I don't believe so, because I feel like I said in the beginning, that there's media manipulation, because as Iran, right, is not a totally democratic state. It's an autocratic nation where the media and everything is owned by the government. They're going to convey whatever message and narrative they want to put out to the world, right? And you find in the same side with Israel, although they're a democratic country, the media has a strong hold on what's going on in the country, and they claim that Iran has inflicted damage, right? But the number of casualties and fatalities is extremely low. But when you look at footage on Twitter, footage on other social media platforms, on YouTube, you see a lot more damage on both sides. I believe that there's a lot more that we're not being told. I do believe that there's a lot more damage than what's being said out there in the media, because also the fact that you find the US is confident in terms of what they did, but also Iran on their side, they are totally not prepared to surrender, and they're also claiming victory over Israel in this conflict so far. And they're saying that they're not surrendering. They claim in victory, and they claim in victory, and they're going to do whatever it takes to protect their nation. And the longer this goes on, right, you're going to see that other countries are going to get involved. But I don't think Russia, like Dima said, Russia is also dealing with the Ukraine war, so they're heavily involved in that. And you find that should they get involved, it's going to be indirectly, because you'll get a situation where they're going to probably donate arms. They're going to supply arms and other weaponry. China as well. They might also supply intelligence in terms of spies and cyberware, because this won't just be fought like physically, like on a certain terrain. You're going to find a situation where there's a lot of cyber warfare, misinformation being spread, on the internet, and you're going to find that both sides' intelligences and systems will be hacked by either countries. And in terms of the US being attacked by Iran, like, I don't want this to happen, but I do feel like you're going to see a situation like 9/11, where there's going to be a random terrorist attack just to send a message. as much as people underrate Iran, right, in terms of their capabilities, I feel like they're hiding something. We should all be like on our toes because you just don't know what they're hiding because how can a country be so sure of themselves, you know? How can a country be so sure of themselves as to we're not surrendering, they've got something backed up. And the number one rule in war is that you don't fight someone who gives less of a damn than you are because they're willing to do anything to win. You know, they have a lot less to lose. And I feel like this is the situation Iran is in. Iran looks like they have a lot less to lose in this situation because a lot of people from Trump's constituency were against this war, you know, and a lot of Americans are also against this war. And you find that there's a lot of money being spent in this war, which is going to drain the economy. So
Yes.
you're going to get a situation where maybe, yeah, the oil prices are going to skyrocket. You know what that means for us in South Africa. If the oil prices skyrocket, like petrol price now is at like 23 rand a liter. So when the oil prices rocket, inflation goes up, food costs go up, and we'll find that petrol is going to go up to like 25, 28, and God forbid 30 rand. You know,
Jesus.
so there's a lot more that we don't know on both sides. Both of these sides are manipulating their data and information selectively, and I just don't think. I think this is gonna go on. I don't think the ceasefire is gonna last. And depending on who strikes first, it's going to be a long one. And I just hope that whatever talks are being held, because I think there are talks that are going to be held during the ceasefire, they come to a resolution. But I really don't think, I just don't think that this is over anytime soon. Not with Iran making such a stance on them not giving up and surrendering. What's your take, Ndima?
Yeah, you make a good point about how we don't really know what the facts are really because each country, I'm sure, will withhold as much information as they can or try to downplay or exaggerate the impact of whatever is going on, whether it's exaggerating the impact of attacks on them or minimizing them to save face. We don't know we don't know what assurances the Ayatollah has and the Iranian government has. We don't know. Are they just saving face? Are they trying to like sort of show face to say that no, we're not backing down. We're going to fight this war if you want this war. Do they have real backing or are they just sort of spinning, threats? We don't know. And being in the internet era makes it so hard to actually know what's right and what's wrong, what's true, what's not, because there's just such for lack of a better word, a clusterfuck, out there of information because it's so readily available. It's hard for anyone to actually know exactly what is going on. But one thing we can be sure of is that each side is definitely hiding some extent of information, whether they're hiding how much strength they actually have, or if they're exaggerating that strength, or if they're hiding the damage that's been done to them, or if they're minimizing it. We don't know. And this is a point that Walks brought up earlier, and that's that the US citizens and the constituency, my apologies, they don't want this war. And I think this has a lot to do with the fact that it seems like Americans have learned from the Iraq war. They know that they went there for
Yes.
oil. There were no weapons of mass destruction. They know. So
Definitely.
I think a lot of Americans have realized this and they're like, we don't want to go to war. Don't send troops to Iran. We don't want another Iraq war. That was a cataclysm. Thousands of people died, thousands of soldiers died, and for what? For George Bush's interest in oil, and that was it. So I think to their credit, they've seen through this, and they don't want. It's not a popular war, even though it hasn't even started yet. But they don't want to send their own citizens to die for political interests. It's not a necessary war. Why is the U.S. involved at all? And I think if we want to answer that question to an extent, we can say, no, well, they're involved in the war because of Israel. Why is up to you. You come to that conclusion yourself. But the US is involved in this war because of Israel. Is there any other reason?
Most
You do the
definitely.
math, bro.
Most definitely. Most definitely.
So a lot has been said, a lot has been asked of this war, and we can only sit back and watch this thing unfold. And I do believe this won't be the first time we talk about this war, because it's only the beginning. And yeah, it's scary. I won't lie. I got chills reading some of the articles and watching some of the videos. But moving along to back home, just to bring it back a bit. Like, I like what you guys both said about this, and like I said, guys, do the research, do the math. We both, like, we have a lot more questions and answers in this conversation. The rest is just up to us to figure out. And like I said, this won't be the last time we talk about this war. But just to move on closer to home, like, this happened last week or 2 weeks back. We saw a devastating catastrophe that happened, which left about 92 plus people dead. The floods, Mthatha, which started on around the 9th of June, where torrential rain, strong winds, and snowfall hit, which resulted in a spillover in the Mthatha Dam, which flooded many homes, schools, roads, and health facilities. And we saw the flood waters reaching levels up to 3 to 4 meters, and over 4,000 people have been displaced, and a lot of infrastructure has been damaged as a result. And yeah, it's been a tragic happening that we've witnessed. And I'd just like to first extend my condolences to everyone affected. What have you guys read up? What have you guys learned from this? What have you picked up? And what do you know about the situation that you're willing to share with us? I'll start with you.
Yeah. Okay. Just to wrap up on the Trump one, like you said, folks, we're still going to deal with that one. It's definitely a heavy topic, and we'll see what happens and keep people posted on that. Moving back to Mthatha, very, very, very sad, because we all gents from the Eastern Cape, and some of us here grew up Mthatha and have family Mthatha. My father stays Mthatha. My mother stays Mthatha. My sisters also stay Mthatha, and they're also affected by this. Look, it's sad because, number one, the Eastern Cape already is one of the struggling provinces in South Africa, and already they were struggling with infrastructure, and especially in Mthatha, they were struggling with infrastructure. There was very high levels of unemployment, and just a lot of socio-economic issues which were happening in Mthatha. So this just made things worse now, because now hospitals have been destroyed, some schools have been destroyed, homes have been destroyed, people died, people are traumatized, people are struggling for shelter right now. People are struggling for food right now. People are assisting here and there. Organizations are trying, I've seen, to donate food, bread here and there. But ultimately, still, it's really left the Eastern Cape in a much worse position, particularly in Mthatha, than they were before. And like you said, dogs, condolences to everyone there. Really, really, guys, we feel your pain. Mthatha, we're from the Eastern Cape. We definitely feel your pain, and we are on our side doing the best we can, and also on the platform raising awareness and letting people know across the globe that there are issues happening in Mthatha. And yeah, we'll keep on trying our best to make sure we stay tuned in and assist where we can. What's your take, Dandira?
Yeah, so as you gents have already said, it's a very tragic event. Of course, when it comes to natural disasters, there's only so much that can be done to prepare. I mean, basically, you can't prevent a natural disaster, but the point is, I think the important question is to ask, was the city of Mthatha ready? Was there any preparation infrastructurally for something like this to happen, so that when something as cataclysmic as this happens, are the people protected as much as possible? But just to get back to something Hawks mentioned, I think the death toll has gone up to 97. 97 people have reportedly passed in the floods.
Crazy.
Yeah, so it's really, really sad, but I think it's also one of those things where we ask ourselves, what more could have been done, because we all know that infrastructurally, Mthatha, things have not exactly been well maintained. So now you ask the question of what was done in terms of drainage systems, etc. What kind of land were people's residences built on, where so many lives were taken and so many more lives were damaged as a result of this unfortunate flood? Yeah, on the ground, it seems like there's mixed signals. A lot of people were saying that the municipality has failed them. They feel like there wasn't enough preparation done, but at the same time, there was a lot of work done by the municipality to try and mitigate the situation and try and rescue as many people as possible, try and salvage people's homes wherever they can. But yeah, it's a very, very tragic occurrence. But maybe it's me being wishful, but I just hope that the government can learn from incidents like this, when it comes to natural disasters, as I said, and as we all know, you can't prevent a natural disaster, but what are you going to do to prepare for it infrastructurally? We're at that point where we need to be able to build and maintain drainage systems, roads, buildings that can weather the storm and that can even reroute large volumes of water from flooding people's houses and destroying the foundations of people's properties. I think a lot of the damage and the deaths could have been mitigated. And I think that would obviously be a failure on the municipality's fault. But yes, again, my condolences go out to everyone who was affected, whether you lost someone or your family or your loved ones were affected. We send our condolences to you, and we just hope, because what else can we do? We hope that in future the powers that be pay more attention to prevention and preparing the infrastructure for things like this.
Definitely, bro. And I like what you said about preparation, because at this stage in time, like, you have to, even though like the likelihood of these things is always few and far in between, you must be cognizant of the fact that natural disasters could happen at any time, and one must be prepared. And for the sake of the people, and also the infrastructure that gets damaged situations, that gets damaged in the situations, with proper preparation, the damage that is inflicted could have been a lot less, and a lot more lives could have been saved. But we'll just never know, because we were not in that situation. And I just hope that we can all come together as a nation, and just help out where we can, because I know there's a few people and a few organizations who are donating clothes and other types of aid and helping out Mthatha just to get their feet back on track. And I know my mom also has a little campaign running where she's collecting blankets, clothes for all who are affected, so that we could we could donate to the church and just take it from there. So if anyone is also doing that sort of thing, like, reach out. Maybe we could just raise awareness as to where you are, and we could hopefully come together and just help out where we can in this situation, because there's not much we can say about this, as the damage has already been done. We only can just hope for a speedy solution. And yeah, it's just a tragic, tragic situation for everyone involved. And it raises larger questions as to what is going on in our municipalities, and are our people really being served, not just in terms of disaster prevention and those sort of things, but the basic service delivery. But that's a conversation for another day. Moving along to just the lighter things, like, we've had two great episodes previously where we had amazing guests. All three of us learned a lot, but it's just different, man. It's just the three of us. But guys, we had Musa the one time, we had Kelly and Sheldon. What have you guys taken away from those in terms of what they brought to the table, the kind of vibe we had, and in terms of the future when we have more guests, like, what else could we do just to bring just a lot more flavor in that.
So yeah, I learned. So Kelly and Sheldon were our first guests, and I
No,
learned
dude,
that,
Musa was our first guest.
of course, my God, how could I forget Moose?
Yeah.
Forgive me. But yeah,
No worries.
so Musa, no, but like, I mean, Musa, Kelly, and Sheldon were our first guests, and what I learned two very different things from those two groups of people. So from Musa, I learned that there's a lot more to entrepreneurship than meets the eye. There's a lot more that you as an individual, as the entrepreneur, have to deal with. You have to be the first responder for everything. You are responsible for building every facet of whatever it is you're trying to build. But when it comes to what I learned respectively from Kelly, is everyone has their own perspective, and you would be mistaken to expect everyone to simply mirror what you believe back at you, and that everyone is just going to say exactly what you think they're going to say. Everyone has their perspective, and you need to know what questions to ask, and you need to really open yourself to understanding where the other person is coming from. Because as much as we have what we've learned in life and what we know and what we've studied, someone else could come with a completely different perspective that you have to take in, and you don't necessarily have to accept it. It can be right, it can be wrong, but I think what's important is to take whatever someone or take that perspective in and just sit with it and take your time to decide where you agree, where you disagree, and how those points can be useful in your own life. So yeah, that's something I really, really took away from those guests. But I'm definitely keen on having a lot more people on the show, for sure.
Excellent perspective, bro. What about you, Raz?
And I definitely agree with Ndima in terms of guests. Guests are fun, man. They bring a whole new, fresh, unique perspective, and you learn so much. And I mean, with guests, they come with, you could say, knowledge, because Musa deals with business, Kelly, Sheldon deal with mental health, and other guests obviously will specialize in whatever field they specialize in. So you learn more, you go deeper in that field, and personal growth. You know, I felt like when I was with the guests, at all times, I felt like I was in class. Or rather, I took it like I was in class, because I took it like a learning session, because I was like, okay, these people come with this perspective. They have their stories and they specialize in a particular field. So let me actually learn from them, like Undima was saying, take something from them. And you know, because it's not just for the audience, it's for me too. I'm also learning. I'm always open to learning. So definitely, man, I'm looking forward to having more guests over and seeing what happens, learning more and growing with the guests.
Yep, definitely growing more with the guests, learning more from them. And what I took away is you really get to understand someone, you know? You really get to understand someone from their perspective and really tap in to their world, because through conversation you learn what really goes on in this person's mind and how they make sense of the world. Like in terms of Musa with entrepreneurship, you know, he has a certain way of looking at the world, and his perspective and his viewpoint is a matter of solving problems on a socially conscious level where on a socially conscious level where he solves problems and creates a business model out of that not only is profit based but also helps people in a real way. And listening to him talk about how he goes about his business, who he deals with, and what I liked is that he talked about being a decision maker in terms of entrepreneurship, because everything counts on the decisions you make in terms of how far your business goes, and how far your business goes and how long it lasts, and also like how well it grows and develops. So I really took a lot from learning that. And with Kelly and Sheldon, it's the same thing, because you really get to tap into someone else's mind and their perspective. And I learned a lot in terms of just allowing people to speak, asking the right type of questions, like Undima said, and just getting their perspective on something you're not necessarily well versed in, you know, because this person spent their entire lives, like in a sense, you know, they've devoted and dedicated their energy and their time in becoming this professional, learning their trade and sharing that knowledge with us, so we can take take away something that we can use and apply in our life like almost instantly. And like Raz said, you grow from those situations, but also you learn how to accommodate other people in your space, because we're inviting them in our space and we're making them feel comfortable. We give them a platform to express who they are, what they believe in, and they all have something to share. And we all benefit from that because we feed off each other's energy, because we're very selective as to who we bring on as a guest, because we have to genuinely like this person and be genuinely interested in what they're doing and what they have to say. And what they have to say also has to match something deep within us, you know? Because that's the only way this thing will work when we have a guest, you know? If we don't like the guest, like what's the point of bringing them here? That's gonna be awkward, you know? You know, like imagine being in a situation where you bring a guest and then one of us is like, "Yela dog, ipi maliam," you know? There's like, what the fuck?
Why do I feel like, why are you throwing
No,
shots?
no.
Who are you throwing shots?
I'm just saying,
Oh, no
it
cap,
could go,
no cap,
it could
bro.
to a totally different avenue where things will get very
Someone definitely
awkward.
caught strays.
You know, yeah, we know who you are, nigga. We ain't
Yeah.
forget, but moving along, you
Oh,
know.
dear.
So it's really important choosing who you want, and because there's a certain vibe that comes with that, and it becomes very clear to the audience. So that's one thing I took away from that. And yeah, guys, has been another awesome episode of Not Another Podcast with Ndima Silwana, Sunshine, Sane, and Sipo Okwana, your three hosts in this thing, and we'd love to see you again as we move on to episode 7, getting closer to that Big 10,
Episode
with 6
7.
episodes, dog. With 6 episodes in deep, we just wrapped up this one. And just thank you for sharing this with us, man. And shout out to everyone listening in Vietnam, Canada, Germany, the UK, the United States as well. We've had such a diverse range of guests, and we appreciate that, man. So salute to everyone to tapping in. And yeah, this is another podcast. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you on the next one.
Next
Easy,
one.
easy.